My name is Ibrahim TRAORE. I am the president of Burkina Faso. But before I am a president, before I am a soldier, before I am anything the world can measure, rank or define, I am simply a man who must live with his own conscience. Today, I do not stand before you as a ruler issuing commands, nor as a preacher claiming absolute certainty. I stand before you as a human being, sharing what I have been allowed to perceive. I speak to my Muslim brothers and sisters, to my Christian brothers and sisters, to the leaders of the Sahel, and to those across the world who still believe that moral clarity matters more than the noise of power. I did not seek what I am about to describe. I did not desire visions, nor did I wish to carry words that might disturb hearts or unsettle minds. Yet, in the early days of 2026, something occurred, something quiet, profound, and impossible for me to dismiss. What came to me was not fear. It was not judgment. It was awakening. A reminder that power is fragile, that no nation is eternal, and that history is shaped not only by weapons or wealth, but by invisible choices made in the deepest and most silent chambers of the human soul. Before I continue, I ask only this. Do not listen as supporters or critics. Do not listen as allies or opponents. Listen as human beings who still know how to pause and to reflect. The days when this experience came to me were not peaceful days. Africa, my home, was heavy with noise. Not the noise of celebration or renewal, but the noise of weapons, of mourning, of arguments so prolonged that their original causes had long been forgotten. During my waking hours, I was surrounded by reports, bombings, displaced families, villages emptied in a single night, children learning to recognize the sound of drones before the sound of school bells. Maps were placed before me, marked with red stains, spreading like infections across the land. Every briefing spoke the language of strategy, territory, leverage, stability, containment. Yet behind every sentence were lives that would never be fully counted, never properly named, never truly understood by those who would debate them from a distance. By day, I was expected to be precise, calculated, unshaken. By night, when the final room was empty and the doors were closed, silence did not bring rest. It brought images, faces I had never met, mothers who would not sleep, fathers who would not return, children whose memories were being shaped not by games, but by fear. I thought of how often Africa is spoken of as a problem to be managed, rather than as a people to be loved. I thought of how easily violence becomes normal when it is explained instead of felt. I thought of how responsibility can slowly harden into distance, and distance into indifference if one is not vigilant. And in those nights, suspended between exhaustion and wakefulness, I began to sense a question forming inside me, quiet, persistent, impossible to silence. What is the value of authority if it teaches us how to command, but not how to remain human? It was during one such night, when my body had surrendered to fatigue but my mind refused to rest, that the atmosphere changed. Not violently, not dramatically, but with a stillness deeper than silence. I drifted into sleep without realizing when waking had ended and dreaming had begun. There was no sudden darkness, no falling sensation, no confusion. Instead, everything grew quiet in a way I had never known before. Not empty, but attentive, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Then I became aware of a presence. It did not rush toward me, it did not announce itself, it did not demand fear. It stood, and in standing, it brought clarity. At first there were no words, only a peace that did not erase reality and a truth that did not wound. A calm strong enough to pass through fear without denying it. I recognized him not because he declared who he was, but because when I became aware of him, resistance left me. Jesus stood before me. Not as an image borrowed from paintings, not as a symbol shaped by culture, but as a presence carrying authority without force. His gaze did not search me, as though to investigate. It rested on me, as though everything about me was already known. In that moment, Africa, with all her wars, her borders, her grief, her unfinished struggles, faded into the background. Not because they were unimportant, but because what I was about to witness did not belong to one land or one people. It belonged to the human story. The vision did not begin with instructions. It did not begin with warnings. It began with distance. I saw the earth from above, not as nations, flags, or disputes, but as a living surface, breathing, fragile, bearing the weight of countless unseen lives. And as I watched, the ground itself began to change. From the height at which I was shown the earth, I saw the surface begin to open. Not suddenly, not violently at first. It was as if something ancient, long restrained, had finally been given permission to breathe. In 4 places, the ground rose. 4 vast forms emerged, slow and deliberate, like thoughts that had been growing in the dark for generations. 3 stood close to one another, their foundations almost touching, their shadows overlapping. The 4th stood farther away, separate, distant, yet no less immense. They were volcanoes. But I understood immediately that they were not mountains. They were powers, nations, systems, structures of influence whose names are known in every language, though none were spoken. Their eruptions did not begin with chaos. They began with order. Fire flowed from them, not wild, not accidental, but directed. Their smoke did not only darken the sky, it shaped it. Their ash did not only fall upon cities, it entered minds. I realized then that this fire was not only destruction, it was reasoning. Each eruption carried arguments. Stability requires control. Order requires force. Prosperity requires dominance. The flames spoke in the language of necessity. The smoke spoke in the language of responsibility. And for a moment, a dangerous, honest moment, I felt their logic touch me. It did not feel cruel. It did not feel monstrous. It felt practical. It whispered that chaos is expensive, that hesitation costs lives, that decisive power, even when harsh, can prevent greater suffering. I felt the temptation to admire efficiency, to respect those who could bend disorder into silence, to believe that enough control could manufacture peace. And in that moment, I understood the warning hidden inside the vision. Tyrants are not born from hatred alone. They are born from compromise, from small agreements with fear, from decisions that promise protection today in exchange for conscience tomorrow. They are born when moral language is slowly replaced with technical language, when suffering becomes a statistic, and when human beings become variables in equations called strategy. Jesus did not speak. He did not raise his voice. He did not condemn what I was seeing. He simply lifted his hand. And the volcanoes went silent. Not shattered, not erased, stopped, as easily as candles touched by breath. In that stillness, I understood. Human ambition is loud, but it is limited. Power appears eternal only to those who have forgotten its source. And as the fires faded, I sensed that this was not the end of the vision. It was only the first unveiling. When the fires were silenced, the earth did not rest. It tightened beneath me, as if something deep within it had begun to strain against its own form. I felt the tension before I saw it. A pressure building, invisible yet unbearable, like a truth held back for too long. Then the ground opened, not as a wound made by explosion, but as a decision. A fracture tore across the land, wide and deliberate. Roads split apart like broken veins. Buildings leaned, hesitated, and collapsed into the spaces between. Entire neighborhoods slid slowly away from one another, as though pulled by hands that could not be seen. I knew this place. No name was given to me, yet recognition came without language. It was a nation that spoke constantly of unity, while quietly rehearsing separation. A country where people lived side by side, yet imagined one another as threats. A land where fear had become a currency, traded daily for loyalty, attention, and power. This destruction did not fall from the sky. It rose from voices, from messages repeated until they sounded like truth, from stories told so often that neighbors became categories, from words chosen not to clarify but to divide. And again, temptation appeared, softer than before, more subtle. It said, "Division can be managed. A fractured people are easier to govern. Conflict can be redirected. Fear can be organized. It called itself realism. It dressed itself as stability. History, it reminded me, is full of leaders who ruled longest by keeping their people suspicious of one another. For a moment, the argument felt heavy with experience. It sounded seasoned. It sounded wise. But another voice rose within me, quiet and stubborn. Can peace built on distrust survive the next generation? Can a nation taught to hate itself remain whole? Can authority that feeds on fracture avoid becoming fractured? I felt that struggle inside my own body, the pull between control and conscience, between order and truth. I thought of moments when I had been tempted to simplify complex problems by assigning blame instead of responsibility. I thought of how comforting it is to believe disorder belongs only to others. Jesus stepped forward. He placed both of his hands upon the broken land. There was no force in his movement, no command in his posture, and yet the earth responded as if it had been waiting. The crack began to close, not erased, not forgotten, healed. I understood then, unity imposed by control is fragile. Unity restored by truth can endure. And I also understood something more difficult to accept. No leader is immune to the temptation of division, especially when fear demands quick solutions and patience feels like weakness. As the ground grew whole again, I believed the vision might finally release me. But the sky was already changing. The sky darkened, not as night falls, but as intention gathers. Clouds rose in layers, heavy and deliberate, folding into one another like machinery designed rather than weather formed. Lightning did not strike at random. It traced patterns, disciplined and precise, as though answering commands I could not hear. Thunder followed, not with chaos, but with rhythm. Then the rain came. Not gently, not to nourish. It fell in violent sheets that erased roads, swallowed fields, and tore the soil from its memory. Rivers abandoned their banks and claimed cities that had never imagined themselves vulnerable. Winds crossed borders without resistance, pulling roofs from homes and certainty from the minds of those who watched their world dissolve. This was not a storm born of creation. It was a storm shaped by ambition. I understood that humanity had reached upward, not in prayer, but in control. The sky itself had become an experiment. What once belonged to seasons and mystery had been measured, modeled, and rewritten. Systems designed to predict had become systems designed to command. And again, temptation appeared. This time, wearing compassion. It said, if we can manage the sky, we can protect the people. If we can control climate, we can prevent suffering. If we hesitate, chaos will rule. It spoke in the language of mercy. It borrowed the voice of responsibility. But beneath its gentleness lived something harder, a refusal to accept limits, a belief that intelligence grants authority, that data replaces wisdom, that capability justifies intrusion. I felt unease rise within me, not fear of the storm, but fear of the mind that had created it. I examined myself in that moment. How often had I trusted systems more than discernment? How often had I mistaken precision for truth? How often had I believed that good intentions were enough to excuse overreach? Jesus did not condemn knowledge. He did not reject discovery. He did not silence curiosity. Instead, he revealed the cost of forgetting humility. He exhaled, slowly, as one does after grief, and the wind softened, the clouds thinned, the storm began to lose its coherence. But before it fully faded, I saw what remained. Homes filled with water, fields stripped bare, families carrying what little could be lifted from the ruins of their lives, not because correction had failed, but because warning had been ignored. I understood then, intervention does not erase responsibility. Mercy does not cancel consequence. Even forgiveness allows truth to teach what pride refuses to learn. When the sky finally cleared, a silence settled over the earth. Not empty, complete. And in that silence, I sensed that the vision was turning inward. The world no longer unfolded before me as a distant landscape. It moved closer. The vision narrowed, not toward nations or storms, but toward rooms without witnesses, conversations without records, and decisions made when no one is watching. I was shown not the future of empires, but the daily interior life of a leader. And there, 3 temptations appeared. They did not arrive as threats, they arrived as solutions. The first came in the form of protection. I saw myself offered stability in exchange for silence. Not betrayal in its obvious shape, not lies spoken aloud, but restraint. I was told that some truths create unnecessary panic, that some injustices are too complex to confront openly, that waiting is wiser than speaking. It called itself responsibility. It spoke of preserving lives, of preventing chaos, of choosing the lesser harm. And I felt its weight. I felt how easily moral clarity can be delayed by fear, disguised as prudence. The second temptation came as efficiency. I was shown a path where results came faster by bypassing consultation, where transparency was reduced for the sake of speed, where decisions were concentrated in fewer hands, so that order could replace disorder. It promised stability, it promised praise, it promised the gratitude of those who value outcomes more than process. I felt the conflict rise in me. I knew how slow justice can be, how exhausting participation is, how tempting it is to believe that good intentions excuse hardened methods. The third temptation came as loyalty. I was shown allies who demanded agreement not because they were right, but because they were useful. They asked me to overlook certain actions, to soften certain words, to remember who stood beside me when the nights were longest. They said, "No one governs alone. Politics is survival. Compromise is not corruption. This is how the world works." Their reasoning was calm, experienced, convincing. And beneath all 3 temptations, I saw the same quiet danger. Each one asked me to trade integrity for comfort. Each one offered short-term stability at the cost of long-term truth. None of them required cruelty. None of them demanded hatred. They required only gradual surrender. And I understood something that unsettled me more than any storm or fire. Evil rarely arrives asking for everything. It begins by asking for one small exception. At this point, I wanted instruction, clear rules, firm boundaries, a list I could memorize and obey. Instead, I was shown something heavier. Power did not appear as a crown. It did not rise as a platform. It did not shine as a reward. It descended as a weight. It rested on the shoulders, not on the head. It pressed downward, not upward. It did not glorify the one who carried it. It bent him. I understood then that authority is not proven by what it can force, but by what it refuses to do. Not when people obey, but when disobedience could be crushed, and yet is not. A truth settled inside me, simple and uncomfortable. You cannot serve justice and power at the same time, when power demands silence. One will eventually ask the other to kneel. I was shown moments from history, leaders who believed they were temporary exceptions, men who told themselves they would compromise now and correct later, rulers who promised they would bend the rules only until stability returned. None of them planned to become tyrants. They became tyrants because they confused intention with outcome and patience with permission. Then I was shown myself. Words I had softened, delays I had justified, decisions I had framed as unavoidable, when in truth they were simply uncomfortable. I saw how righteousness is not lost in one dramatic fall, but in a series of reasonable choices that slowly train the conscience to sleep. There was no accusation in this realization, only clarity. Moral choice, I understood, is not a single heroic act. It is repetition. It is waking each morning and choosing again, even when yesterday's choice brought criticism, loss, or isolation. Service is not proven by sacrifice alone, but by consistency. And the price of justice is not paid once. It is paid daily, quietly, without applause. As the vision drew closer to its end, something within me began to change. I was no longer observing, no longer interpreting symbols, no longer standing at a distance. I was being uncovered. Not before the world, but before myself. I saw then that much of my prayer life, though sincere and disciplined, carried a quiet hunger I had never fully admitted. I prayed often, but beneath those prayers lived a desire to be reassured, to be told that my intentions were pure, that my sacrifices were sufficient, that history would one day understand me, that suffering would eventually justify itself. I wanted confirmation that the path I had chosen would be proven right. What I received instead was not reassurance, it was humility. I no longer saw a president. I did not see a uniform, a title, or a future carved in speeches. I saw a man who would one day stand without advisors, without applause, without explanations prepared in advance, a man who would answer without rank. I felt the weight of Africa's hopes upon me, heavy, living, undeniable. But I felt something else as clearly, the limits of my strength. For the first time, I understood that leadership does not excuse dependence on grace, it demands it. Power tells a lie to those who carry it. It whispers that responsibility replaces humility, that authority reduces the need for mercy, that being necessary makes one sufficient. That lie fell away, and I asked not for success, not for victory, not for protection from enemies, not for vindication before critics. I asked for mercy. Mercy for the times I mistook resolve for righteousness. Mercy for the moments I chose silence because courage felt too costly. Mercy for the pride that hides even inside those who speak sincerely about justice. I asked for Africa, not for dominance over others, not for revenge against history, not for the illusion of instant transformation. I asked for healing. Healing for nations tempted to replace old chains with new ones. Healing for leaders who speak the language of liberation while practicing the habits of control. Healing for people taught too often that dignity must be borrowed, imported, or enforced through fear. I ask for those who rule, and for those who protest, for those who still believe change is possible, and for those who have quietly stopped believing that either side is listening anymore, that we would be spared from leaders who believe themselves indispensable. There was no promise that suffering would end quickly, no illusion that wisdom would become fashionable, no guarantee that repentance would erase consequence. But there was assurance that repentance still changes direction, even when it cannot reverse damage, that humility still restrains destruction, that mercy still interrupts cycles pride insists must continue. And I understood something both unsettling and hopeful. God does not panic. When the vision released me, it did not leave me with theories. It left me with responsibility. So I speak now, not as one who has mastered these truths, but as one who has been confronted by them. To my Muslim brothers and sisters, I say this with respect and sincerity. Humility before God is not weakness. It is the recognition that no ruler, no system, no ideology can claim authority that belongs only to the Creator. Submission to God must always produce restraint toward people. If it hardens the heart, if it justifies cruelty, if it excuses injustice, then it is no longer submission. It is ambition wearing sacred language. To my Christian brothers and sisters, I speak plainly. Faith that does not shape the conscience becomes decoration. The teachings of Jesus are not a shelter from responsibility. They are a demand for it. He does not call us to escape the world, but to refuse to become its cruelty. He does not offer comfort without cost, but mercy that reshapes how power is used, how enemies are treated, how truth is spoken. To the leaders of the Sahel, and to all who carry authority anywhere in the world, I speak as one who struggles daily. Power will test you most when you are convinced your cause is just. It will whisper that urgency excuses excess, that results matter more than methods, that you alone can hold everything together. Do not believe it. The world does not collapse because of a lack of strong leaders. It collapses because of a lack of accountable ones. Moral failure rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with banners or warnings. It arrives as fatigue, as rationalization, as the slow normalization of what once disturbed us. That is why vigilance is not paranoia. It is discipline. And to the citizens, to those who vote, who protest, who work, who raise children, who bury their dead, who still hope quietly, guard your conscience as carefully as your rights. Do not surrender your moral sense for the comfort of certainty offered by others. The world does not need more certainty. It needs more honesty. I do not stand before you claiming victory. I do not offer myself as an example to be admired or followed. I am still learning. I am still correcting. I am still tempted. Each morning, I wake knowing that yesterday's integrity does not protect me today. Yesterday's courage does not guarantee today's clarity. The work is not finished. It is never finished. I will continue to govern. I will continue to make imperfect decisions. I will continue to fall short of the ideals I still believe in. But I commit myself to this: to choose restraint over dominance, to choose truth over convenience, to choose service over legacy, again and again, especially when no one is watching. What gives me hope is not the belief that disasters can be avoided completely. It is the knowledge that they can be limited, that arrogance can be interrupted, that division can be healed before it becomes irreversible. Prayer, humility, and repentance still bend the direction of history, even when they do not control its speed. I believe that God still intervenes, sometimes through people, sometimes despite them, sometimes by allowing consequences to teach what warnings could not. And I believe this: fear is not the final word. Fear immobilizes. Awareness awakens. The purpose of what I have shared is not to alarm you. It is to invite you into attentiveness. If you are a leader, examine the small compromises. If you are a citizen, protect your conscience. If you are tired, do not trade your moral sight for the comfort of borrowed certainty. The world does not need more confidence. It needs more honesty. Each of us faces the same quiet test, regardless of position or power. Every day, we must choose again. There is no final victory, only vigilance or surrender. If these words have caused you to pause, to reflect, or to quietly question your own assumptions, let that reflection continue. Stay present, stay engaged, remain part of the fragile, necessary conversation that still believes conscience matters. And if you wish to walk with me in that ongoing effort, to listen, to question, and to remain awake together, then remain close. The work is not finished, and none of us should face it alone.